Okay, guys, today we have Matt Wallden on for part 2 of our Chek Totem Pole series. We went over the psyche, we talked a little bit about breathing and how the core you should draw in or versus bracing. We went over a lot of stuff with the body.
Yeah, just concepts in the industry, really golden concepts for people to take on themselves and understand how emotions and the psyche affect the body. And then we just went off the cusp a little bit, a little bit, and just spoke about just ideas we have with the body and rehabbing people.
Yeah,
So
you know our podcast, we kind of let it pretty free flowing, but this is an epic episode. This is part 2. We've got 2 more with him. Next week we're going over respiration and everything below that on the totem pole. It's going to be epic. All right, welcome back in it. Today we've got Mr. Matt Wallden. How are you going? We're going part 2 into the psyche today of the totem pole, which is going to be
Excellent.
sick. I'm enjoying this shit,
stuff.
dude. I'm loving this.
yeah, for sure. And whatever comes up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's structured. It's
So, I mean, last time we sort of summarized a fair bit of it and had an overview of the totem pole, but yeah, so today was a plan to go more into the psyche part of it, and what was there was a question that someone asked, and what was it, Harry? It was understanding the difference between the psyche and the limbic emotional system.
Yeah. That's a great question. And actually the totem pole kind of illustrates it a little bit, because we've got the psyche is at the top, right? And then we've got the limbic emotional system represented in amongst the viscera lower down on the totem pole. And, you know, in the original iteration of the totem pole model that Paul created in the 90s, it didn't have the psyche on the top. This is something that I don't know exactly which year it was, probably around 2010, something like that. Paul added the psyche to the top of the totem pole. So it was always respiration at the top,
okay.
Which is interesting in itself. If you think of the word respiration, then you know, it's re-spiriting, right? So you inspire, you bring spirit in, you expire,
cool.
You push spirit out, and the process of doing that is respiring, right? So it's re-spiriting. So it's kind of like this constant recycle, right? And so that was the top of the totem pole previously, but then really with Paul's deeper and deeper investigations into why people, you know, you could give people exactly the right things to do, but they might not do them. And it's kind of like, well, what is stopping this person from changing their diet in that way, or doing this exercise program, or getting to bed on time? And almost invariably, of course, it links back down to beliefs and values and you know, various, I suppose, formative influences on their psyche that thereby influence their behavior. So basically he put the psyche in at the top, like I say, around 2010, I think it was. But prior to that, you had the limbic emotional system represented, as I said, in amongst the viscera, so the organs of the body. And what Paul always said about that is that it's the only part of the totem pole that's a floating factor. And so, in other words, sometimes emotions may be almost nothing of an issue, right? So maybe sort of low down on the totem pole. But other times they might go right to the top. If you've got a real emotional event happening in your life, then we all know it's all consuming, right? So there was kind of a flux there, or a flexibility in that limbic emotional element. But I think more sort of technically, the difference between the psyche and the limbic emotional system is that, or a good way to think of it is partly that reptilian reflex model, you know, that a lot of people will be familiar with, where you've got the reptilian brain is the inner core of the brain, which really regulates all of our autonomic functions, and particularly the 3 key things are safety and security being number 1, sex, and then sustenance. Sorry, the other way around. Safety, security, sustenance, sex. And those are the 3 reptilian reflexes, right? And so the reptilian brain, the deepest inner core of the brain, is the part that addresses that. Then you've got the limbic emotional centers, which grow on top of that. And the interesting thing about it, if you study evolutionary anatomy, is that you can actually see this in the evolutionary anatomy textbooks, that a reptile's brain is essentially like a kind of inner core of our brain. And then as the mammalian clades start to evolve, you see limbic emotional centers starting to develop. And of course, this is all linked in with them rearing their young and caring for their young and defending their young. Whereas a reptile, if it's hungry, it might just eat its young. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of limbic emotional connection there. But mammals will, put themselves at risk of death to protect their young. And so that, and they tend to live more in groups and be more kind of social creatures. So then beyond that, you've got the neocortex that starts to develop. And that's, what we use to think and to create and so on and so forth, and is particularly developed in humans, but it is developed in other animals as well, other mammals especially, and primates. So that model kind of highlights the limbic emotional elements of the brain are kind of like a mid stage in evolution. The psyche really is more of an overall term for the psychological functioning of the body, and the word psyche actually is synonymous with soul. Okay, so originally, psychology is technically the study of the soul, which a lot of people wouldn't realize today. They kind of think it's brain psychology or something that's kind of very structural, but actually it's study of the soul, and therefore essentially the behaviors of the individual and the drives of the individual. So yeah, in terms of delineating, really limbic emotional is much more about the emotions, and psyche is a kind of a broader context for those emotions, the kind of landscape of someone's life, their sense of life purpose, and all of the things that drive them forwards in life or hold them back in life. And yeah, so emotions and the limbic emotional system are a key part of that. As we know, you probably know that metaphor of the elephant, the path and the rider. You heard that one before?
No, I haven't.
Is that something you're familiar with?
No.
Okay. Well, look, it's a really good coaching tool actually, and it ties in with the whole psyche theme, because I think it's Dan and Chip Heath talk about it, and I think it's their model, but it may just be that they've kind of elaborated on it. So these guys have written a number of popular psychology books, and the idea of the elephant, the path, and the rider is that you've got, let's say you want to get somewhere, you want to achieve something in life. Well, there's a certain path to get there. Some paths are more efficient, more direct. Other paths are more tenuous or sort of, they're circuitous, and you end up, eventually getting there. But you kind of need a destination, right? So otherwise you could end up anywhere. So you first need to establish the path, and you also need to establish if there are any obstacles on the path. So let's say, you want to become a millionaire, but there's going to be a few obstacles on that path for most people, right? So you got to work out, well, what are the obstacles? Or you want to set up, like you guys have set up a gym, and a rehab center. Well, there's going to be obstacles to that. You can't just say, hey, here's my center. You're going to have to find some money, and you're going to have to, get your insurance, and you're going to have to, do all of the kind of checks to make sure that it's legal and that you can attract people into it. You're not over-committing to something that's too large or under-committing something that's too small, and all of those factors, they're all little obstacles that are on the path to owning your own center, as an example. So that's the path. Now, the rider, of course, is kind of the neocortex. It's the part of the brain that is decisive and that is analytical and that is creative, and so the rider kind of knows, this is the destination I want to go to, this is probably the best path to go, but what are the obstacles on the path? So the rider's kind of the intelligent part. But then you've got the elephant, and the elephant is the limbic emotional part. So it doesn't matter how clear the path is or how decisive or focused the rider is, if the elephant doesn't want to go, because the elephant is the most powerful element in the room, right? So this is often why people don't reach their destination or their goals or their destiny, is because the elephant doesn't want to go there. And that's the emotions, that's the limbic emotional centers. So essentially, we do need to work with emotions, and we do need to evaluate people's emotions, and we have various ways that we can do that. Obviously, in the Chek system, one way is to work with a psychologist. One way is to work with someone who specializes in that sort of thing outside of what we do, and to have a working relationship with them. But within the Chek system, within the model that we use things like the health appraisal questionnaire, which analyzes these 28 different organ and glandular systems, and within that, it assesses your limbic emotional health, looking at your levels of depression, anxiety, and anger, right? So it's, just 3 key emotions. And so, once you've got a score there, well, you can see, well, which of these do we want to address? How can we address them? And of course, you're not addressing them in terms of, let's say someone's got depression. You're not saying, okay, this person's got depression, we'll prescribe or refer for antidepressants, because we know that depression isn't driven by a lack of antidepressants. There's something else driving that depression. And normally it's multiple factors that are contributing to that depressive state. It could be, any number of things, from persistent pain to, not achieving what you want to with your life, or to having things happen to you, like bereavements or like breakups and so on. And so as a coach, what a Chek professional would do is they would coach the person through that challenge and look for the value in it. And in doing that, you can reevaluate what's happened to you. So most emotions, well, I was going to say most emotions are about things that have happened to you. And there's obviously a large chunk of them that are, but some of them are also about, what may happen in the future. Anxiety is a great example of that, So anyway, that elephant path rider concept is a really useful one, because often, you'd be working with someone and they're just not making the gains that they want to and making the gains that you want them to. And so you can look at that through that model and say, okay, so, is it the elephant that doesn't want to go there? Have you got certain emotions holding you back? And so, of course, often they won't know, because that might be unconscious, which we can move on to when we talk about the psyche in more detail. But also, are they focused? Is the rider focused on where they want to go to? Have they got a goal set or a set of goals, and have they delineated that into a series of steps, as opposed to just this one goal that's way off in the distance, which is called an outcome goal? Have they delineated it into process goals, which are the single steps that get you there? And then probably the key one that tends to trip people up on a day-by-day basis is the path, and there's obstacles in the path. So, they have full intention to go to the gym. They want to go to the gym. They're excited about going to the gym. Then their kid forgets their lunch. And so they're like, okay, I better take the lunchbox into school. So they end up going to school, and now it's too late to go to the gym. And so an obstacle's arisen. You're like, okay, well, that's why you didn't do your training on Monday. So, what could we do to mitigate that in the future? Like, or if that happens again, what's an alternative? Could you do like a 4-minute Tabata? So, could you still fit that in, even if you can't do your 1 hour training set? Could you just do your 4 minutes in a Tabata circuit? So you at least get your heart rate up and you get a little hormonal kick, as it were. So you're looking for solutions to overcome those obstacles.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's just a nice model to help explain the limbic emotional.
It's like bringing in, it's like logical, right? It's this making logical steps, which always makes you feel good towards anything. Like, and like you said there, I think a big thing is just not living up to your potential, and that's got to be huge for everyone in some sense, in their own roundabout way. And I remember there's a Jordan Peterson quote. I'm going to quote it wrong, but it's like, don't tell them they're not enough. Tell them they could be so much more, or something like that. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, there's a whole different possibility, and it's Jake and I speak about it sometimes in the sense of, like, wonder what that voice is, like the psyche or some sense, that tells us what we know we need to do at all times, that we all sort of know, there's this right answer for every situation.
Deep inner knowing.
Yeah.
Like if you're with a partner and really like deep down, but it kind of scares you. You're not meant to be with them, or you are meant to be with them, or whatever it is. But yeah, what do you think that is? I think it's the soul guidance that we ignore.
Yeah, definitely. There are. I mean, I think one of the challenges with this field is that there's so many different terms that give us an inkling or some of the essence of what's going on, but it's very difficult to pin each of these things down, like soul or emotion or psyche. They're kind of, there's a word for it, which is aporia, which means they're kind of on the limits of our rational knowledge. They're right on the edge
Fully.
of that, our rational knowledge. We kind of get a sense for what they are, but we can't really pin them down. And I think part of that's because everyone's experience is different. You know, we're individuated souls. And so we got slightly different perspectives, each of us. And so we can have a lot of resonance. It's like if you and I went to stand up on top of a hill, you know, we can get a very similar picture for what that view looks like from the top of the hill, but it's not going to be exactly the same because you're standing to the left of me and I'm standing to the right of you. So there's just going to be slight nuances. And I think that's kind of the challenge with these subtle terms. But, you know, I think one of the things that actually links it back into what we were talking about with the totem pole and the way these limbic emotional factors are embedded within the viscera. So right in the organs there is that, you know, first of all, the reason Paul created the totem pole in that way is that, of course, in many traditional medical systems, such as traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, amongst many others, the idea that the emotions are housed in the organs is kind of almost ubiquitous. You know, so I mean, everyone goes to their heart when they feel, I feel love, I feel joy. They go to their heart. You know, just as an example. But so if you think of the notion that we tend to get gut feelings, we tend to feel sick to the pit of our stomach, we tend to not be able to swallow certain things into our life. You know, there's all these kind of languages you get, you know, something's a pain in the back, a pain in the arse or pain in the neck, or, you know, that does my head in, all of these kinds of phraseologies that we use. We start to see that, you know, we use parts of the body, but often the organs to describe how we're feeling. And, you know, really what we're alluding to there is this kind of visceral sense or this gut sense, this gut feeling. And the interesting thing about that is that, you know, the guts, the way we perceive what's going on in our guts. So like you were just saying, Jake, about having this kind of deep inner sense of knowing, which you can't really put down to a rational thing. You just kind of know that essentially is intuition, right? It's one of the four functions of consciousness, as Jung would call it. But it's kind of undervalued in our modern day scientific materialist society. And part of the reason for that is that, you know, scientific materialism is a very left hemisphere dominant approach to understanding life. And it's very valuable. You know, sometimes you get people that are sort of quite negative about science or about materialism or about rational approaches. And often that negativity is because there's too much focus on that side of life, let's say. And, you know, Houston Smith says something along the lines of our greatest mistake was thinking that we could understand life through objective assessment of it. In other words, scientific materialism. But, you know, in taking that stance, we can only understand half of life. You know, we miss the entire other half, which is the subjective side, right? And I've butchered that quote, but basically that's what he's alluding to with his comment. And so so the way that works, sort of from a neurophysiology perspective, is that most of the rational thought, analytical thought, occurs in the left hemisphere. Okay, and one of the interesting things about these things as a kind of general comment is that often you'll get people say, "Oh, that's all been debunked." You know, there's no such thing as left brain, right brain, you know, dominance and so on. And that's just not true. It's just not accurate to say it's been debunked. What is accurate is to say, you know, we don't just function in our left brain. We can't just switch off our right brain or vice versa, just switch off our left brain and be just in our right hemisphere. That's absolutely true. That has been debunked if people believed that. But it's that there's a trend towards some people are more active in the left hemisphere, or some activities create greater activity in the left hemisphere, and they tend to be the analytical activities. The right hemisphere is much more creative and more engaged when we're in creative modes of being. But the important thing and how this links in with the emotions and gut feelings is that it's the right hemisphere that receives most of the sensory drives from the gut. Okay, so these gut feelings that we get, the heartfelt feelings, the grief, the angst, whatever it might be, the anger, that comes back into the right hemisphere. And that's why artists are so good at expressing that, right? That's what art is all about. It's, you know, it's about all of the kind of emotions of life, or good art tends to be, you know. And so that comes back into the right hemisphere. Now, if we are mainly in our left hemisphere most of the time, then first of all, we don't feel our gut feelings. We try and work things out rationally. We try and analyze things and break them down, and we can actually shut down our sense of intuition, especially when our society doesn't value that, or it would seem that way. It's really interesting because, at school, if you're in maths class and someone says, what's the answer to this quadrilateral equation, and you say, well, my gut feeling is that it's 5.83. You're going to be absolutely slammed in that class by the teacher. So you can't use your gut feeling. That's all poppycock bullshit, whatever, and maybe that's an inappropriate tool for that job. But at the same time, we've all seen, detective series and the rest of it where there's some kind of crime committed or some kind of conundrum, and the genius detective or whatever has a hunch, I have a hunch that there's this going on. I have a hunch that there's that going on, and essentially using their gut feeling. And we all totally admire that. And that is true to life as well. The best detectives and problem solvers don't just use rational methods. They use gut feelings, right? So the challenge that we have is that in our societal model of education, and also in the way that society ticks over, it's scientific materialist. So it's quite objective. It's quite number crunching. That's what a business is all about. And so we tend to be drawn into that mode, but actually that can shut down our sense of, the right hemisphere, the creative side, but also our ability to feel our gut feelings. So this is what's called vertical integration. When you can feel your gut feelings and your intuition, your sense of what's right and wrong, that's normally coming from a place deep inside of you, like you're describing, Jake. And it's coming back into the right hemisphere. And sometimes we can't rationalize that. We just kind of know it's the right thing. And the reason we can't rationalize it is because A, it's not rational quite often. And B, we then need horizontal integration. So that's horizontal integration between left and right hemispheres. So this is where, you guys know the zone exercises. A lot of the zone exercises that we teach in the Chek system are to integrate left and right hemispheres, right? So by integrating those hemispheres, then what you end up getting is a better sense of vertical integration, because you can hear your gut better. But also, once you've heard your gut, you can then integrate left and right and analyze that and make sense of it in the world. And that's how the system is designed to work, if you like. It's evolved to work.
Yeah, it's how applicable is that left and right thing to being a body worker? You know what I mean? Or let's say being a Chek practitioner, you
massive.
Know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how it's at the start, you almost you just have to be in the left brain, because it's just so you got to start there. But then with time, the right brain comes as a part of that. And that's where you can see people sort of sometimes respecting the numbers too much, and just not seeing what they're seeing and seeing what the person's moving and whatnot. And I think that's I'm sure that's with every job. There's some sort of sense in that. Maybe not if you're
absolutely
like a flight like a person that tells all the planes where they are in the sky. You want to be pretty left brain for that.
It seems like even with spiritual work too, like, because I follow a lot of people, like Carl Jung would be a great example of someone who's very like in the analytics of everything and understanding the brain and everything like that. And where I found Paul really did a good job of, remember what I took from HLC too was like, you just need to do your gong. You just need to do your Tai Chi. That's how you really level up. Don't think too much about it. And I was like, this made it so simple, because like before that I was seeing psychologists and things, and I was like, for me personally, it was too much thinking. And I know sometimes you got to use your brain to, like some methods are using thought to, meditate. But I found that, the Qi Gong and just watching it, witnessing is so much better for me personally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, I say things like Qigong or Tai Chi or meditation are teaching you to control the analytical side of the brain, which is so kind of facilitated and developed as a muscle, if you like. If you think of the brain like you would do your muscular system if you're constantly using the left brain, because that's what school has indoctrinated you into. That's what the job you're doing requires. That's what society tends to value more. Then you're going to get a stronger left hemisphere function. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, what Callum was just saying about starting out in the left brain, there's that diagram. I don't know if you can recall it, but it's essentially a bell-shaped curve. And so you start out, the y-axis is the high axis, right? It's the one that goes, y is high, so it goes vertical. And of course, the bell, you're starting low on that y-axis. So what the y-axis is representing is complexity, right? So the higher you go up, the more complex it is. The x-axis going along the bottom, what that one's representing, and again, I've got a diagram I can share with you, but the x-axis is representing elegance, okay? And so then you've got this bell-shaped curve going over the top. And so initially, essentially, your elegance is low and your complexity is low, right? You don't really know much. So let's take a field like the human body, like we train in the Chek system. So initially, you go into the Chek system, you could be coming completely fresh from a completely different profession, let's say, or fresh out of school or whatever. And so you don't know a huge amount about the body, so you don't have a lot of complexity in terms of your knowledge, don't have a lot of elegance in terms of being able to describe it. But as you do the first level of the training or some of the prereqs, the complexity goes up a little bit. You're like, oh, okay, I now understand this about nutrition. I understand that about biomechanics or about muscles or whatever. So now your complexity's gone up a little bit and your elegance has gone up a little bit. And now you know more than, say, your family or your buddies. And so you can explain it a little bit. It might be a bit clunky. But then you do the next level of the training and the complexity goes up. And the next level of the training, complexity goes up, and your elegance gets a little bit better and better as you go. And so you're going up this bell curve, and eventually you reach a point where the complexity is so high. And I think I described this to you, Jake, and I would say that the IMS4, which is, of course, what the totem pole is teaching in the Chek system, that's probably the pinnacle of the complexity, if you like. And then what happens is you start to drop down the other side of the bell curve. Okay, so you're still improving your elegance, but the complexity, you're starting to see things in more and more simple ways. And you're seeing the simplicity within the complexity. And so this is what's often called the second simplicity. And it's a sign of mastery, right? It's a sign that you've got a complex topic which you've been able to integrate in your own being, in your own mind. And now you can explain it relatively simply. Okay, so you kind of have to go through that complexity journey so that ultimately you get to a point where you're kind of a master of that and you can explain it simply. And that would be the same, like, with a sports coach, for example. You get someone who learns how to strike a tennis ball, and initially they're rubbish and they can't really explain it to other people, and bit by bit they get better at explaining it, and then they get a bit too technical about it, so it's actually becoming less and less helpful because it's too technical. And then eventually a really good coach can just keep it super simple because they've mastered how to coach
it's so
the forehand
true.
or the serve or whatever.
Yeah.
But linking into the brain, that initial phase is left dominant, right? The initial phase when you're learning something, it's all like, oh, so what is this? Oh, okay, so that's the biceps muscle, and why does it affect the neck? Oh, because the nerve supply is from the neck, and what levels is it? Oh, okay, so it's C6. Oh, all right. So what does that mean? Oh, that's the sixth cervical vertebrae. So so you're kind of looking at the detail, and it's all very left-brained. It feels quite left-brained, but then you go into the next phase, which is where you're becoming more right-brained around it, okay? Because now you're starting to see it as a big picture. So it's not just the bicep, but you notice that the bicep works in conjunction with the deltoid, and the deltoid works in conjunction with the trapezius, and actually that's a kind of abduction, with your palm upwards would involve all three of those muscles. And so now you're starting to get a kind of bigger picture, which is what the right hemisphere is about. It's about piecing things together. So all these disparate little chunks of information, we now build that into a bigger picture. So now we've got the left brain and we've got some of the right brain starting to come in. And that's kind of towards the top of that complexity curve. And then we go down the other sides and we start hitting, integration, let's say.
That's amazing.
So that's where the mastery kind of kicks in.
Yeah, Steve, that reminds me.
Having said that, I just realized I said that the wrong way around. Because I think you start out a bit more right-brained.
Yeah, right. I was thinking that before.
You're not so sure.
yeah. But yes,
it's more playful, right? At the beginning, you're kind of like, you don't quite know what's going on, so you tend to be a bit more playful with it, and actually, I suppose, you're trying to piece it together, but then as you start to piece it together better, you're able to handle the complexity because the left brain's kicking in. So actually that's started out the wrong way around, but basically, so start out right brain, not really knowing much, but being more playful, get more and more complex, more and more kind of like an expert. So that's the left brain dominance, and then it's bringing back in that playfulness and that simpleness on the other side of the curve. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's cool. The what I was going to say is, like, we went to Diary of a CEO. I don't know if we spoke about it last podcast, but he said,
you mentioned it.
Yeah, he said something really cool, which kind of just come up to me. Then I was thinking, he talked about, like, when you're building content and stuff, like being able to look. So lately I've been doing, like, I did one on seed oils the other day, and I really researched it. And I was like, he's like, research something, but then write about it and then speak on it. And he's like, and it's that exact model you just explained then, like the mastery of something. So if you write it down, you understand it, and then you speak on it. And he's like, it's like sharpening a blade. It's like every time you do that, you get better at it. And I was like, that is so empowering. It's like it's just so empowering to know you can really research that. Like, I understand seed oil so much better now. You know what I mean? Because I've written about it and I've spoken about it to the camera. And it's like, I think that's exciting.
Yeah, teaching is key. Hey.
Yeah, to master something, you need to teach it. Hey.
Yeah, it's
it really does put some sort of pressure on you to understand it. You know, it gives you a deadline to work to, which obviously is important. But then you articulate it. So it's kind of this like thoughts, words, deeds process in a way. You know, you're kind of manifesting it into your own reality and your own life by thinking about it and learning about it, and that's all mainly thoughts, and then writing down what you're going to say and researching a little bit, so that's mainly words. Then you actually speak the words, and now it's kind of embodied in you. And David White's got a nice phrase that is that he's kind of talking about poetry, but I think it's the same with teaching, is that he says the art of poetry is overhearing yourself saying things you didn't know you knew.
True.
And I think teaching is like that as well, you know, because what's happening is, by pushing yourself to teach something and then putting yourself kind of under the pressure to deliver that, quite often your brain pieces things together as you're going. You're like, oh, wow. So that's how these things integrate. So it's, again, it's that kind of mastery element where you're actually bringing disparate concepts together. And you overhear yourself saying things you didn't know you knew, which is great. Sometimes you say things wrong, like I just did, but you see, then that reinforces it, because I hadn't thought of that model until you started talking, and it's a model that perhaps I looked at maybe 3 or 4 years ago, or put together, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So then I've reiterated it incorrectly, but now I probably won't make that mistake again, right?
Yeah.
So these are the things. It's having, I think it's quite important to have some humility as well, because if you don't want to ever, or you want to never be wrong, let's say, which of course everyone doesn't want to be wrong.
Yeah. Well, you'd never move. You'd never move, man.
Yeah,
like,
you've got to take that plunge, right?
Yeah, I watched the Chek press. I watched a Chek press video I did today, and I'm stoked. I pretty much got it right, but I watched Paul teaching it, and I was like, there's a few things I was like, just a little off. But I thought to myself, who gives a fuck? Just have a go, man. Because a lot of people stop before they even start, and that's how we get better. Is like you just said then, like someone will go, you're supposed to have your elbows in tighter when you go up or something, and I learn. Yeah. So it's like,
that's actually on the Chek press. Let's talk about that for a second, because I want to see the way I want to see the way your head thinks. So like, as you just brought up, I never thought about it before, right? But when you see something like a Chek press, when it's in, say, the flexion component of it, do you see that as like a good exercise for an anteriorly tipped scap, because you're somewhat using the lower trapezius and the serratus, or would you?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is that the way you would be thinking?
Well, go on. What else did you have? Other ideas?
But then, like, then the biceps there, so then maybe the bicep pulls the head of the humerus forward at the same time. But that's not that's not the scapula though, is it? So is that the way? Like, say I see someone with an anteriorly tipped scap, and you're basically just posteriorly tipping it as the exercise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so I think all of those things you said are accurate, actually, because obviously the short head of the biceps does attach into the coracoid process. So it'll potentially tilt the scapula forwards, right? Like you said. So it comes down to, it's not just about the exercises, it's about the form. It's the way you do it. So if you do it with anteriorly tilted scapula, you can't get that scapula to stay flush to the thoracic cage, then it's probably not the right exercise. It's probably too advanced for you. Yeah. Right? So you might want to find something much lighter. And you know what Shirley Salmon teaches is essentially the same movement, but with the hands against the wall. So you're kind of gliding your ulnar border of your hand up against the wall. So you've got a little bit of support there. And normally people can control their scapula as they do that movement. Sorry, my mic's in the way. But yeah, you're just going up against the wall there. So you're getting that same shoulder flexion, but you're just teaching the scapula, let's say, upward rotators, if you like, or upward tilters, to maintain control of the scapula. So you might descend the exercise for that person. But yeah, I mean, I think of it, you know, if you're sideways on, then of course that's creating a huge lever on your scapular depressors and downward tilters, if you like. And so it, you know, the load is taking them this way, and you're having to engage the muscles to lift up that way. Obviously, it's working your lower thoracic erectors in particular as well, which is great for an upper cross syndrome. And then as you come to open out, well, now you're working your scapular retractors. So for the upper cross type pattern, that slumped gravity type posture, we all tend to adopt over our desks or when we're driving cars or whatever. That's a great corrective exercise for that for daily living in a field of gravity.
And then you think about how a forward ball roll now, you know what I mean? Like forward ball roll when I first started was like just teaching lumbar-pelvic rhythm. But then like you're saying, you start to see what everything is and how gold it all is and how people can get similar programs for different things that still make sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's like you can. It's cool. Eh?
Oh yeah, fuck. You definitely think about how smart all the Swiss ball exercises are once you get a better understanding of anatomy and everything.
And just unlocking a home gym for the client, basically.
Yeah, so true. So true. Oh, a travel gym, man. I just travel everywhere and I take a Swiss ball. Yeah. I mean, I got to train every day. I got to get much strength training in back then, but the Swiss ball like kept me so pain free.
Yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
It's like that thing that we mentioned before about realizing the benefits makes the benefits real.
Yeah.
Right? So you know what you were just describing there, like with the forward ball roll, Callan, is that, you know, initially, it's just like a rollout of any other kind, isn't it? But as you start to understand what's pulling on what and how that's creating the load on the abdominal wall and whether that's affecting more upper abdominal wall, lower abdominal wall. It's the upper abdominal wall it's affecting more. But so, you know, then, you start to understand, you know, how you can work different muscle groups potentially in their inner range versus their outer range, how, you know, you can teach hip back dissociation, but also shoulder spine dissociation, you know, maintaining a neutral spine whilst you're doing that, of course, and how that's a great skill set. And it's not, of course, how we want people to be completely neutral the whole time, but it is a skill that we should be able to engage with as and when we pick it, you know, and it's a great way to make the spine strong in essentially its most potentiated position, right? Because neutral spine is where you've got the greatest potential to move, right? If you're already flexed, you can't go into more flexion. So neutral means that you've got the most potential. You can go into flexion, extension, rotation, side bending. So that's a way of thinking of neutral spine, and that's what forward ball roll teaches, right?
Man, I'd love to ask you about, you know how there's still in the bodywork field, there's one side that talk about stiffening the core and one side that talk about like drawing in, right? Which is a form of stiffening, right? And then they both talk about these sides. Like what's your take on that? And what's your take on the other side's argument?
I asked you the same question at IS4, remember?
Well, it's like one of these debates that's been going for sort of 20 years, and it's quite funny because, you know, if you hear, I haven't heard McGill's take on it directly from him, but so McGill is the one that has tended to perpetuate this idea of stiffness in terms of, you know, maintaining neutral pretty much for everything. And I guess, you know, it's the idea of bracing versus hollowing is kind of the way it's often billed. So McGill is a proponent of bracing, and so things like the plank is the classic kind of thing that McGill would recommend. And if you think of a plank, you know, you can't do that at low intensity. So this is one of the issues with the plank. You know, a plank is quite high intensity for the majority of the population. It's close to, 100% of maximal voluntary contraction to stay in that plank, right? Now, of course, as you get fitter or lighter, then it might be lower percentages of your max, but it's still quite intense. So essentially what that means is you're going to be using your outer unit muscles. Okay, so the more phasic muscles, the muscles that we tend to use for power and strength, which means it's not actually conditioning the muscles that you need for stability. That's the irony of McGill's approach, is that we know that pain inhibits the inner unit and the intrinsic muscles that stabilize. And his recommendations are almost entirely to condition the outer unit. He doesn't like activating the inner unit. So that's kind of interesting. Now, that doesn't mean that his approach has no value, because of course it does. Like Paul often says, I forget who he quotes, but he says there's a little bit of truth in everything. So there's some truth in McGill's approach. But bracing is something you want to do when you're potentially deadlifting or squatting or something where the trunk has to be, or it's ideal for the trunk to be quite static, because like say deadlifting or squatting, most of the work's coming from the legs. And of course the erector spine, you're going to be involved, but you don't want too much flex in the spine generally when you're squatting or deadlifting. Does depend on your goals, but generally speaking, you're going to maintain a fairly neutral spine. So then bracing is a great idea there. But if you want to twist, like when you walk, for example, bracing is a terrible idea. It's because it's compromising the flow of energy through the system. And there's research on this as well. There's a guy called so it's like trauma without the A, and I think Morley is his research partner, and they've done a lot of research actually showing that when you artificially brace the thorax, for example, so you put a brace around it so it can't move, which is essentially kind of what the McGill approach is attempting to achieve, then it compromises efficiency and gait. No surprise, right? It's like, there's greater impact, there's increased oxygen demand, and so on and so forth. And actually, we've talked about Diane Lee before. Well, Diane and I wrote a paper in the Journal of Bodywork and Movement Therapies where we talk about this research, and Diane ties it in with her thoracic rings, and that whole concept of the thoracic rings being able to move, which of course they can't do when you brace. So that's kind of the McGill approach, if you like. And I might be doing him a bit of a disservice. He might have some other nuances in there. I haven't specifically taken his training. I've got his textbook and have used that a lot. And he's got a lot of great stuff in there. So, I'm not anti McGill.
Yeah.
I just think there's a time and place for it. On the flip side, you've got Hodges and the team from Queensland, who were the original researchers really, or at least the researchers that really popularized the information into the transversus abdominis. Which is this deep abdominal muscle, which again you alluded to, Callan, talking about the hollowing, right? So the main role, if you like, or the main movement, let's say, of transversus abdominis is to draw the abdominal wall in and to create sort of hollowing like a corset. And the thing with that is that what they teach is that you should engage that at certainly less than 40% of maximum. But a lot of the research suggests it should be about 3% of maximum. So it's extremely subtle activation. And the reason you want to do that is that it just provides a little bit of stability that then allows mobility over the top of it. So there is some slight stiffening, but it's not sufficient stiffening that you can't rotate and twist and move effectively.
Yeah, wow.
So
wow, that's and when you just get these little bits that are just so obvious and there in front of you, but simple, like what you said about, I never really thought about that, the rotation component of it, because I'll naturally do that. It just feels, and the decompression component of it, just feels natural within my body. Because a lot of all these things I try to do to myself, and I feel what feels better, and I take other people's ideas on, have a look, but it's so natural. My core draws in. I saw a photo of me as a child lifting a little weight, and my core was like sucked all the way in, and so my rib cage was huge, and I think I used to do that because it made me feel big. But I knew I did that. Yeah. And is there a fascial connection from the TVA into the multifidi?
No, it's not fascia. Well, okay. Fascia connects everything to everything, right? Yep. So there will be there will be connective tissue, but in terms of an actual sort of identified sheet of connective tissue, there's not a direct, let's say, insertion, but the transverse abdominis, you're making me dig into my anatomy now. It inserts into the middle layer of the thoracolumbar fascia, and the thoracolumbar fascia, that middle layer, then goes out and it envelops around the erector spinae group as a whole. So we'll have connections into the multifidus. It's more the connection with multifidus is the neurological connection that when transversus activates, the multifidus will tend to be automatically recruited at the same time, and vice versa, because it's this kind of that's why it's called an inner unit. The whole unit activates together.
Is that the same like with like multifidus, TBA, posterior fibers, the internal oblique, pelvic floor, diaphragm, and that's it. So they are all on the same reflex loop.
Correct. Yeah. That's
okay.
right.
So if one doesn't work, does that shut down all of them, or is it?
Well, this is where the research from Hodges and those guys was quite important, because what they showed is that the original title of their book was Therapeutic Exercise for Segmental Spinal Stabilization. Okay, so therapeutic exercise, easy to understand. For segmental spinal stabilization, what they're talking about is a specific segment of the spine can be shut down. So you could have multifidus shut down at, say, the L4-5 level on the left. So you can get very specific inhibition. And that's due to pain in that locality. And so it would be, let's say you've got a facet injury at L4-5 on the left, you will get inhibition of the multifidus at L4-5 on the left. Okay. Yeah. And a level above, you won't see so much inhibition, level below. So, the answer to your question is that, it probably is the shades of gray type situation, but what they showed was that there's quite a discernible difference between different levels of activation. And therefore, in that example I gave, you've still got 4 levels on the left that's working, 5 levels on the right that's working. So the likelihood is that the transversus is going to be working pretty well as well. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
But there could be some inhibition, and this is the problem. I think when people learn, they want black and white. Yeah. They want, either a yes or no response to that question you just asked. And that's not, reality isn't like that.
Yeah, everybody's so different.
Yeah.
With that, man, I was just starting to think then, and like you're talking about lumbar erectors, and say if someone had weak glutes, are they a co-contraction of each other? You know what I mean? Like they're both going to extend the hip, but one's going to posteriorly tilt it while the other anteriorly tilts it. Is that right? In the sense of hip extension?
Yeah. So I'm just trying to picture the context. So you're thinking like in a deadlift, or you're thinking like alternating Superman or something?
I'm thinking like you're running, the legs in front. Yeah. It's driving back with the glute and the lumbar erectors, right? Mm-hmm. Would the lumbar erectors be firing in that extension phase of gait? It would be at the end, right?
Yeah.
And if someone
you can palpate that, like have you seen that test where if you were to stand up now and palpate your erectors, and your multifidus as well, and you put your left foot forwards, let's say, as you load the left foot, you should feel the erectors on the right, or the multifidus on the right engage. So that's that kind of sync with the hip going into extension to draw you forwards onto that front leg, and the erectors engaging at the same time. So you can palpate that.
And if someone had say the glutes are weak and it was going into like hyperextension of the lower back, or let's say hyperactive lumbar erectors, I've always wondered if that creates a posterior shear or an anterior shear of lumbar vertebrae. If they were just contracting without, into hyperextension.
Technically, the muscle itself will create a posterior shear. Yeah. So this is why it's actually quite important to train the lumbar erectors when there's something like, say, a spondylolisthesis, so an anterior slippage of a vertebrae. You will get a posterior shear by training the erectors.
Well, cool.
But what was it? So you're just saying, but obviously if the erectors are overactive, in combination with the psoas being overactive and there being an anterior pelvic tilt, well, now you're going to have a mechanical, like a gravitational loading on the vertebrae, which will create an anterior shear. Yeah. So it's, there's always there's a trade-off, right? And so in theory, that anterior tilt should be sort of ably what would be the right word? I suppose compensated for by the erectors pulling backwards. But if for some reason the erectors are deconditioned or they don't fire quick enough, or there's other factors like viscerosomatic inhibition or lower abdominal wall that's not firing at the right time or not firing appropriately, then that could end up creating stress on the passive subsystem. Okay, so we talk about active subsystems being the muscles, which we've just been talking about. Passive subsystem obviously being all the connective tissues and the discs and the joints and so on. So now what's happening is loads going into those connective tissues, into the passive system, and across time, across repetition, that's where you're going to get, your aches and pains and injuries ultimately occurring.
Yeah, wow.
That's awesome, eh? There's a little debunk I wanted to see if you're interested in doing, is like, there's so much around the squat and deadlift at the moment, especially like through functional patterns and things like that. I just wanted to get your take on the, like, they're just, I know I remember I spoke to you about a little bit about like how joints actually like to be loaded and they need to be loaded, but it's really like, it's getting massive out there, man. Like people are like, fuck squatting. Like
I know, I did see the recent functional patterns thing, and
I actually said it to Paul too, and he liked it. He was going to maybe do a video on it, which would be sick.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, look, functional patterns take on the squat is kind of like, why load the spine when you can still train the spine through running or doing stuff that in their mind is more functional. And I think it's a great philosophy. I think it's a good way to look at the body. I think they've got lots of kind of creative insights. And that was one of the beauties of the internet era, is that you get to see everyone's kind of ideas. But the challenge then is to make sense of them, and we have this tendency to become tribal, right? And so you get the functional patterns tribe say, oh yeah, I forget his name, but this guy's right and everyone else is wrong, and you get the Chek tribe saying, well, he's wrong and we're right, and and so that's a sort of normal human instinct. But I think the reality, again, there's a little bit of truth, a little bit of let's say insight in everything, and with that notion that you can train the spine without loading it from above, which I think is essentially what that little social media post was about. That's absolutely true. You can, but also sometimes you need to load the spine from above. It depends what you're doing, right? So I think the functional patterns comment that you don't need to load the spine to make it stronger, and maybe it's not that functional to load the spine, is probably true for a majority of people. But you think of someone who let's say plays rugby, they have to load the spine from the top in the scrum. They have to load the spine from the top when they're lifting people up above them to from the line out. There's loads of times where a squat would be hugely functional for a rugby player. Right. And if a rugby player followed functional patterns and said, oh yeah, this guru says that loading the spine from above is no good, they're going to get injured in their rugby match. It's not going to take long, and they'll be in trouble, right? Because the squat is great conditioning for them. But you take, say a sprinter, they don't really need to be loaded from above ever. So the squat actually might not be that great for them, and the functional patterns approach might be better. So it's like all of these things, there's a time and a place for each of them, and I think we have to kind of, it's easier said than done, but we have to try and take a higher view and say, well, when is this helpful and when might it not be helpful? Because there is value. There's value in both approaches.
Yeah, I love a lot of their stuff. It's fucking awesome. But it is. You're right. It's like, it's just applicable to who's in front of you.
Yeah, it's like you take. I take something from everyone. It's
me
like,
too. Yeah.
Like from them, I took sort of. They're the ones that first broke me into like foam rolling and like how to do it to yourself and whatnot. And that's a major part of what I believe in, because I've just seen quick little things that you can unlock mobility through the exercise. And then and just being curious with slings, like they're using the anatomy trained slings. I can see what he's thinking when he's doing these exercises, and I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea for that sling. And it all just sort of follows the rules of when you're throwing your body around in some sense, which is cool. And just getting lots of reps of like bending over and picking something up at a lighter weight is helpful for a lot of people. But like Stuart McGill, that you talk about, like what I took from him was when he was talking about like, when you do these exercises, it stiffens tissue for a period of time, up to like half an hour or something like that. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
cool. Like, okay, even though obviously it does that, but now it's like, now I can think, oh, it's stiffening the sacral fibers of multifidus for the next half an hour before she drives the car.
When you've done a deadlift session, your back feels amazing, doesn't it?
Oh,
when you've done a deadlift session, you feel invincible.
better,
You feel like,
yeah.
oh, I feel so upright, I feel so strong, and that's that effect, right? But if you were to do a deadlift session and then you've got something that requires a lot of, say, flexion rotation, you might not feel like you're properly prepped for that, and you might have been better to have done some wood chops or some cable work, to kind of work up and to, I suppose, kind of wake up the rotational fibers within the spine, whether that be the little rotatories muscles or the bigger oblique muscles or whatever it is, but just increasing that proprioceptive awareness so that now you're ready for, maybe you're a baseball pitcher or something like that, and there's a huge amount of rotation in that. You're probably going to feel better for having warmed up using some cable work than doing a deadlift, because the deadlift is too sagittal, right?
Yeah.
But I feel great running, for example, like doing some sprints after I've done some deadlifts, because it's sagittal enough that I feel that kind of forward drive as I'm sprinting off. I feel that kind of power from the deadlift, that you've kind of woken those fibers up.
Oh man, I got the best question to ask you. I've wondered for so long. Okay, with running, right? I was doing it today in the mirror, and I was like just standing there with bilateral like feet next to each other, and moving my arms and getting the rotation out of the thorax, right? And then playing with different patterns of moving the arms. So like you can sort of scoop the air and almost like little figure eights with your arms. Yeah. And I get way more, because I remember you spoke like free energy out of it. Remember how you spoke about the transverse plane free energy component? I get way more free energy like that. And just when I'm doing that, but I wonder, okay, like, is it meant to be from people that have looked into this further than I have, like hands straight, you know what I mean? Like upper trapezius floating a little bit, so it's sort of anteriorly, posteriorly tipping. Like, what's your thoughts on what the arms should be doing?
That's a good question. I mean, funnily enough, it kind of ties in with the previous question, because maybe it's 20, no, it won't be 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, Owen LaCour, was just emerging on the scene, and Movnat, and one of his early concepts, I'm not sure if he still teaches it, but one of his early concepts was that you should run with your hands by your side, because it was a waste of energy to flex your arms because you were using a bicep. It was a waste of energy to pump your arms. And so, there's various footage of him running through the forest or running across a bridge with his arms down by his side. And I had a student come in and we were doing gait analysis, and he's running around like, with his keeping his arm completely still. And I'm like, what the fuck's going on here? And everyone in the group are kind of looking, go like, what's going on? Some kind of neurological damage or whatever. Yeah. And anyway, of course, you don't say anything initially because you just want to see how they're moving. And in the end, of course, we say, okay, well, so what did you spot? Well, and the group are going, well, he's not moving his arms. Yeah. And I go, well, so how come you're not moving your arms? And then he explained, well, because Owen LaCour says, and you're like, really? and of course, you can understand where Owen is coming from, right? The idea is he's thinking, well, the legs move us forwards. We don't need to swing the arms. It's a waste of energy. Evolution is all about conserving energy, so let's just leave the arms by the side. But that completely misses the fact that the arms counterbalance the movement of the legs, completely misses the fact that the spine is the spinal engine that drives the legs forwards in the first place, completely misses how all the sling systems work. It's like, so I'm interested that that's what he thinks, but I don't think I agree with him, right?
Oh, no way.
So back to what you're saying, with your arm swinging, I'm interested in what you're saying because I've not played with that, and I'd like to see how that feels for me. It doesn't fit obviously with conventional running technique concepts. And as you say, you were static with the legs, so I wonder if that movement will translate well to when you're actually running. Have you tried it?
Yeah, I have. I have.
Yeah,
and it worked.
And what do you think?
It feels really good, and especially if I'm going uphill. Like if you're going upstairs, it's like for some reason.
So what would you do? You kind of it's almost like you're
literally doing
swimming through the air a little bit.
Like I can't. This is stopping me, but it's like sort of like this.
It's like you're down the club.
Yeah,
got some music playing.
like that. And see, I'm getting like an internal rotation, so I feel like I'm winding up all like my supinators are being on stretch, and then it's sort of slinging back. So for me, anatomically, it sort of makes sense. And what I also use it for clients is I'll get them to do it, and you'll feel a wall quicker on one side. So you'll do it, and your rib cage will hit a wall, and then they can see how that torque's going down to their knees and hips, and how their hip maybe swaying out from a blockage in their rib cage when they're running or something. But it just brings that awareness to them, like, oh, that is tighter in there, like, you know. But yeah, I don't know. Let's think about it and figure this out. Maybe we'll change the game. I'm thinking long distance for this too. Maybe I'm thinking if that makes a difference. I'm not sure. Feel like
who would be a good person to ask about this is Helen Hall. Have you heard of her?
I've heard the name.
She's a Chek trained professional, but she's also an ultra runner, and she's done a whole lot of she's written a book, and she's done some audio programs and various things on running technique. So she's really studied this stuff in a huge amount of depth. And she has this special kind of measurement tool in her clinic, which I forget the name of it, but essentially my very basic understanding of how it works is I think it fires little light beams at different intervals up the body. So it's not like X-ray or anything like that, but it's more that the computer can pick up the light refraction. And essentially you can assess the way the person moves in 3D. And so she's in, it's kind of one of these tools that, there's like 3 in the UK or something. And so it's quite innovative and new, but she's really mastered that as well. So she's got this amazing kind of insights into how different people move and what may or may not be more effective. Like I say, she's done Chek training as well, I think to IMS 2 or 3.
I think I heard her on your podcast. Did she go on your podcast?
Yeah. She'd be an interesting person to interview and to ask about all that. Yeah. Because the cool thing is that she practices it as well. So she's not just theoretical. Yeah. She does ultras and all the rest. And she's a huge enthusiast. But yeah, I mean, I think when you're running, obviously what you're doing is you're using a transverse plane. This is kind of, again, what you were alluding to at the beginning, Callan. So using a transverse plane strategy primarily to move through a field of gravity. And that's why human gait is so efficient. Every other creature, because they're quadrupeds, they have to come up and lift their front legs. So they're using a sagittal plane strategy. Now we use a little bit of sagittal plane. We do still go up and down like this as we run, but we get a bit more sort of rotation as we go. And we obviously swing the pelvis through like this. And it's that combination of the flexion and the rotation that means that the pelvis starts to kind of seesaw, like a kind of, well, it's not seesaw, it's more like, it's a seesaw that's loose on its hinges. That's the way Helen describes it. So it's kind of going up and down like this. Yeah. So it's creating essentially a kind of, what would be called a Lorenz attractor type shape. So now that obviously needs to be counterbalanced at the top end. And, one of the things that ties in with what you're saying there about the trapezius is that when you land on your right foot, the right trapezius will engage. And when you land on your left foot, the left trapezius will engage. And that's to keep gaze. That's to keep essentially your vision on the horizon. So the stereoscopic vision. And, essentially, again, tying back into what we talked about last time about the totem pole and how, this special sensory platform needs to be maintained on the horizon at all times. Okay. So the trapezius will engage on the right as you run through, and then on the left as the left leg comes through. So actually it's the other way around. So as my right arm goes forwards, my left leg is hitting the ground, and therefore my left trapezius is engaging. Okay. So it's the foot that's striking the ground is the side that the trapezius engages. And that stops the head from tilting out and keeps those eyes on the horizon. So I'm just trying to think, if you're doing something with your shoulders, so as you're running, so you're going to be looking at the opposite side, aren't you? So you're doing something with the opposite arm as the left foot hits the ground, the right arm is coming forwards in that kind of slightly swimming motion. So I don't know. I mean,
you have to try.
The thing that I do, Callan, is I want to try it myself, but I want to film you doing it and just watch you run, or someone doing it, and just try and understand what's interacting where.
I'll
film him
because we think about evolution of man, right? Maybe the next evolution is we have now the awareness of our body and the range, and we can break it down of how we're meant to move and move even better from when we were animals.
Yeah,
Maybe. I'm a bit skeptical of that because
just for a few some, you know.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, obviously because of things like that Owen LaCour sort of example, that we get ideas and then we think we know better than nature, and we try and make interventions, like ideas that we talked about before, like cushion shoes. They make sense, right? And to cushion what you're landing on seems to make sense until we understand it better, and it's like, oh no, actually we're much better barefoot. In terms of efficiency and function.
Oh man, we could go into that.
Yeah, I have a lot of reverence for evolutionary processes. So when someone says, perhaps we stand in the wrong way, or we run in the wrong way, or we eat in the wrong way, then I'm kind of like, I'm always using evolutionary processes as my guide to give me a sense of how we got here, and therefore what the default mechanism is likely to be.
Where would someone, to get a good overview, like where would you send someone that just wants to start learning about that as a resource?
Ooh, it's a tricky one, because I wrote a chapter back in 2006. It's published in 2008, which was really looking at all of this concept of what I would call attractors, biomechanical attractors. So it's like the idea that there's certain things that we have done through evolutionary time that have shaped our biomechanics, and therefore have a profound effect on our biomechanical function and our sort of general movement performance. And so, that chapter is available on my website. So that is quite a good resource on that front. But within that chapter, I've drawn on concepts from Serge Grakovetsky and his spinal engine. I've drawn on Phil Beach's concepts. So he's got a great book called, what is it called? Oh, it's all about archetypal rest postures and movements and meridians. Movements and meridians. Yeah. Or is movement? Yeah, movement and meridians. So there's that. I actually wrote a paper with Mark Sissons about it as well. Sick. And Mark did a good little video. So if you wanted to look at a little video of these idea of, what we wrote about was one of these elements, which is called archetypal rest postures. So if you just look up Mark Sissons archetypal rest postures, then you'll get a little 5-minute video on YouTube, which is quite cool. It gives you a little insight into a part of that. But yeah, I guess it's tricky because you pick things up from different sources, throughout. So I've picked up stuff from Diane Lee, of course, from Andre Vleeming, obviously from Paul and all of his primal pattern concepts. So in the Chek system, I would say probably, scientific back training, scientific core conditioning are great places to understand more about the notion of primal patterns and how they integrate with day-to-day function.
Well, and that's been updated now, hasn't it? Scientific back?
Yeah.
I was going to say, because I don't remember that.
Well, I think actually, as I'm saying it, I know primal patterns are definitely discussed briefly in scientific core. I think we go into depth in them for the first time in advanced program design.
Okay. Cool.
So that is the one where we actually sort of explore it in more depth, which is a prereq for the second level of the training. But yeah, it depends, depends how much depth people want to go into with it. Or work with a Chek professional, because a Chek professional will be able to actually assess your primal patterns and explain to you about it all. And then, the whole notion with primal patterns is that you want to reach primal standard, right? We should each be at the standard that a primal human being would need to be at to survive. Yeah. So you've got to be able to squat effectively, lunge effectively, bend, twist, push, pull, and walk or run effectively with efficiency. And if you can do that, then you're at primal standard, right? And of course, most clients that we see, one or more of those is not optimal. And so we need to work on addressing those primal patterns before we can start loading them up and giving them athletic conditioning.
So well put.
Yeah. That's perfect. I love it.
Yeah. So this time we'll get some people to write in some questions. We'll make sure we do another ask the question, and we'll do another one again. Is it a couple of weeks away? Yeah,
a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
What do we got on the agenda for the next one? So we've covered the totem pole and kind of what it is. Went a bit over the psyche.
I would love to next session touch on the visceral somatic reflexes a little bit and just know a bit more about when someone, what shuts down these muscles in some sense of which organs.
Yeah.
And
definitely. That'd be a good one.
Yeah.
We could talk about that. I mean, we had sort of planned to potentially look at respiration, but because that's the next level down. So psyche's at the top, then we've got respiration. But we can easily bring in talking about viscerosomatic reflexes in relation to respiration.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Respiration and we'll go. I'm sure we'll go
man.
off the top.
And then we could even start on the eyes and ears and jaw and atlas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we always make a little plan, don't we? Then we never stick to it. We're just chatting.
I know.
So we just do whatever happens.
Anyway, after this, stand up, start moving your arms, and let me know what you think.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a go. I'm going to swim. I've got to go take my kids to school now, but I'll swim to the car.
With the goal of as much free rotational energy as possible. Because my head was just thinking maybe we're saving the obliques and we're getting it out of the arm. I don't know. Yeah, we'll figure it out. If obliques are fast twitch and for long distance, but we'll talk about it next time.
You got a good mind. I love it. It's awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks so much, Matt. We'll chat to you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, sounds great. See you then.
Bye.
Bye-bye.